Where I live, we have an urban legend. I suppose that's the case for everyone in the world. There's always a haunted house, a troll beneath a bridge, or a monstrous creeper lurking in a now abandoned train tunnel. For me, my urban legend was the Poglins, or Poglin kids, depending on who was telling the story. I don't expect you to know it, nor my tiny town of Walsend. It's a dreary post-war industrial area, with red brick homes and an abundance of druggies and crime. So it's not exactly the sort of place you'd imagine the nihilistic youths and aged ship workers to exchange stories of monstrous imps. Everyone seems to have their own story of the Poglins. One girl swore her cat was eaten by one of the Poglin kids. A boy in my class was adamant that his cousin, who smelled like fish, was a Poglin. Whenever a person disappeared or ran away, you'd hear old ladies whispering over coffee about how the Poglins took them. Each story describes them differently, but my big sister always described them the same. According to my sister Janine, the Poglins were grey, pot-bellied, goblin-like creatures with ragged bat ears and flat noses. She would take great delight in describing their enormous mouths, which were filled with deformed yellow fangs and tusks. She said they were children once, before they were experimented on in the long-since-abandoned Green Acres Hospital. She told me how one night, the Poglins broke free, killing their cruel captors and setting fire to the hospital, before fleeing into the wooded Dean nearby. Naturally, this Dean happened to be on our doorstep, so I kind of thought maybe she had added that part into the story just to frighten me. However, Janine was adamant. They escaped into the Dean and made a home for themselves in the water pipe, which empties into the stream down there. Nesting in the water pipe, that's where they lived, she'd tell me. However, my sister was not the only person in my family to speak of the Poglins. I remember my mother often telling me not to stay out too late, or the Poglins would get me. My gran said the same. "Stay away from the Dean," her croaky voice would say. Whenever I asked why, she always told me, that's where the kitty snatchers live. A common trait shared across the stories is that the Poglins devoured the flesh of humans, and they have a particular taste for children. Needless to say, this shared myth of monsters, passed around to frighten children, had the opposite effect on me. For my obsession with the Poglins only grew as I got older. And one summer, my friend Ben, who was equally as fascinated by the stories, suggested that we go find them. What a great idea that would be. Perhaps they were some undiscovered cryptid, or maybe they were just a myth used to scare us. Whatever the case, it would be fun to find out. That's what we thought. We were going to search all the haunts listed in the various urban tales of Poglins, and I knew just where to look first. Behind the old Woolworths, which is now derelict, there is a dirty back alley, previously known as Beggar's Alley, on account of being where the homeless, vagrants or drug users would dwell. But that all changed after the 22nd May, 2008. A homeless man, fondly referred to by the locals as Harold the Hermit, was found dead behind there. Him dying wasn't strange. After all, the life expectancy of homeless people isn't exactly long or prosperous. What was strange was the manner in which he died. Skinned, chewed up, chopped to pieces. That is how the papers describe the grotesque remains of Harold. Apparently, there were bits of him scattered across the streets for days after, and the bloodstains still cling to the brickwork in that alley. Ever since his death, no vagabond or addict would dare step foot into that alley. You might be wondering, well, why would that place be significant to the search for the Poglin kids? Well, despite the police saying that his murder was most certainly committed by fellow tramps, their official words, not mine, there were stories circulating that the Poglins did it, that they were being driven out of their hiding places, with all the new developments and housing being built around the Dean. Ben and I considered the site of the gruesome death as the perfect first stop in our investigations. We wandered that alleyway, finding very little evidence of monsters. There was plenty of other stuff, such as piles of black bags, used needles and condoms. Nothing out of the ordinary for our town, we thought. However, I saw that some of the stories were true. The walls and the pavement still had some red staining to them, with a smear trailing towards a sewer grate. I was about to tell Ben when a voice howled for our attention.
"Get out of there!"
shrieked an aged and smoked withered voice. We turned and saw the locally infamous Mary the Tramp, or Mary the Mad as my father called her. She was harmless. Some old lady who got behind on her rent, and when her benefits were cut, she ended up living on the streets. We asked her why she didn't want us in the alleyway, and her face shriveled with worry. Her eyes jutted side to side, as if to check who was listening. And then, through her wrinkled lips, she whispered her tale. "I saw him," she muttered, her lips quivering. "I saw him take Harold." Mary claimed that the night Harold died, she was across the road. It was raining heavy, the droplets drumming away on the cardboard shelter she used. She said it was late, really late, when she heard his first cry. But it wasn't until he started screaming that she opened her eyes and saw it. There in Beggar's Alley, Harold was on the floor, wrestling and fighting off numerous things, small things, the size of kids.
"They chopped him up," she said, and shoveled bits of him in their mouths, and the rest was slung into baskets and sacks.
When I asked her why they didn't attack her, she revealed her torch. She explained that as she shined her torch over to them and saw their luminous white eyes, they fled, disappearing down the drain. It was a grisly story, but the tale gave us no new leads. Ben suggested that the next place we give a look should be the disused hospital, Green Acres. We'd all heard the stories growing up. Some Nazi doctor given a new identity by the government to continue his experiments and explore the further reaches of science. The doctor's name varies. Sometimes it's Dr. Crow. Other times it's Dr. Dread or something cliche like that. Well, anyway, in the tales that involve the hospital and the doctor, it's said that he secretly acquired a bunch of runaways or kids no one would look for. Then in his lab, he exposed them to various chemicals, diseases, and radiation in the hopes that he could create a creature that was resilient to almost all inhospitable conditions. What actually came out was the birth of deformed, monstrous things that he then bred in captivity to create more abominable subhumans. To keep them and their violent impulses in line, he used extremely bright light to torment and hurt them, causing them to develop an intense photophobia. In the end, this led to his monstrous spawn turning on him. One dark night, when the power went out in the hospital, the Poglins in their violence could be contained no longer. They broke free, butchered the doctor and his staff, setting the place on fire and fled into the night. So it felt natural to step over the burned out entrance and clamber through the vine-strangled corridors of Green Acres. There was graffiti everywhere, some warning about the Poglins, others just your generic hell is here sort of stuff. In its leaf-littered and charred state, it wasn't hard to imagine the hospital as the site for some nefarious doctor and his wicked experiments. Alas, when we searched the hospital, we found no mention or sign of a Dr. Crow. There was a Dr. Crane on one of the few remaining photos of the staff, but no Dr. Crow. We even did a Google search. Nothing came up. So, take that part of the legend with a pinch of salt. Despite finding nothing to suggest a monstrous doctor worked here, we continued looking for potential clues or signs of Poglins. One room did have the words, "The Poglin kids broke their chains. They left no evidence, no remains." It wasn't exactly definitive proof by any means, but it definitely made this place feel like the right place to be looking. For a moment, me and Ben separated so he could check Ward C, whilst I checked the children's ward. It was super creepy in the ward. Roots, vines and spiderwebs hung from the ceiling, whilst crack pipes and dolls with cracked faces lay strewn across the room. On one of the walls was a huge mural of a pastel clown, whose painted features were cracked and crumbling. Yet, its sinister smile seemed to follow me as I navigated the empty bed frames and wheelchairs that littered the place. I scanned the room and saw another phrase scrawled upon a wall. "They lurk beneath the bed. Do not look, they've not been fed." The sprayed-on sentence sent shivers down my spine. Eerily, a small red ball rolled out from beneath a vacant bed. The only bed with a rat-bitten mattress. It travelled across the floor, stopping at my fear-frozen feet and sending my heart into a frenzy. I was terrified to look under that bed, fearful that a Poglin and its goblin grin would be waiting for me. Then again, it could have just been the wind, I assured myself, as I picked the ball up. Against my judgment, I slowly lowered myself towards the floor, gingerly descending my head so as to look beneath. I breathed a sigh of relief when I saw that there was no ghoulish subhuman lurking under there. There was nothing. Out of nowhere, came a clattering and what sounded like the scampering of tiny feet. It was like the sound of some startled animal scurrying out of the room. Fright surged through my body like a bolt of lightning, causing me to drop the ball in my hand and fling my body back up from the ground. I leapt up, looking around to see what it was. Yet I appeared to be alone.
Boo!
Ben shouted as he jumped up behind me. I almost ripped up out of my own skin with shock, but the fear quickly turned to annoyance. "You're not funny," I told him. But this did not halt his hysterical laughter. "Come on, let's go to the water pipe," Ben suggested, his words barely being able to leave his lips between each chuckle. "There's nothing here, no sign of him." I agreed, but as we made our way down the corridors and out of the building, I couldn't shake this feeling that we were being watched. Still, we pushed on, having found nothing to suggest the story of the Poglins and Green Acres was true. We journeyed down through the oaken walls of the Dean. That place was one of the few settings that almost always got brought up in the tales of the Poglins. Perhaps that's why the uneasiness grew with each step we took towards the stream. We talked about the Poglins and the stories about them eating kids, wondering if this was such a good idea after all. Ben assured me it was going to be fine, handing me a torch. Our only weapon against the things if the stories were to be believed. It appeared we would need it, as the evening shroud of night was closing in over our little town. Down the Dean we climbed, weaving between bark and branch, rambling through rough leaf litter and thorny brambles, until we came upon the stream. Littering the place were abandoned clothes, socks, shoes, tops, as well as a few broken beer bottles and crushed cans of lager. Other than that, though, there was nothing to see. Not a Poglin in sight. No tracks or signs. It was for that reason that I was willing to call it a day. Ben, however, was eager to push on and suggested if we want to find Poglins, we had to look where they said to nest. Reluctantly, I followed him along the bank of the stream. Though I dreaded the next few steps I took toward that concrete pipe, Ben clambered through ahead of me, eager to discover. With his legs sticking out the end of the tunnel, Ben shined his torch ahead and recounted what he could see. "There's not much here. A football, a few branches, and a school jumper." Ben spoke, his voice echoing out of the dank water pipe. Unlike Ben, I was cautious, constantly looking at the sun as its rays fell between the tree line and descended faster into the horizon. "Ben, I think we should go," I suggested, my voice urgent and fearful. I didn't want to tell him, but I was getting this really strange feeling, a sort of hair-raising dread that tingled its way down through my bones. My mind imagined this sensation was some sort of animal instinct, some primal sense, trying to tell me to run and get out of there. "Wait, there's something... Ah!" My friend cried out, his voice shrill and full of terror. I yanked him back into the fleeting light of day, only for him to emerge from the shadows, cackling without end. "You're so easy, you know that?" Ben sniggered. With a thump to the arm, I asserted that his games were over, and so was the investigation. In my mind, I was ready to put all these tales down as nothing more than an urban legend. A boogeyman to frighten children into behaving and coming home on time. However, fate had other ideas. With shock and horror, I turned to see a pair of lumpy grey hands, both bearing 3 talon-tipped claws. From the water pipe, these hands emerged, and with eagerness, they clasped on either side of Ben's head, pulling him backwards into the dark water. They were real. They were actually real. My mind screeched silently within my skull, its howls of total shock freezing my soul. "God help me!" Ben screamed, this time his voice honest and true. Snapping me from my horror, I shone my torch into the tunnel, and for a split second, I glimpsed a small pot-bellied creature, grey-skinned with a great fat mouth, a bulging throat sac, and luminous white eyes. The thing hissed and recoiled from the radiance, retreating back into the murk. "They're real! They're actually real!" Ben panted, his face bearing scratches and claw marks. Rescuing him from the pipe, I helped him to his feet. But we should have been paying attention. For had we, the pair of us would have noticed the sun had finally set. In the gloom of twilight, we heard their calls. Hyena-like giggles and chirps, which sounded out from every direction. "We have to go now," I yelled, and the pair of us rushed up the bank of the Dean. Looking back, I saw them. Bald-headed, ragged-eared things with bulging, swollen neck growths. Crawling on all fours, their stumpy feet and claw-like hands, riddled with deformities, carried them swiftly up the Dean. More raced out of the stone pipe, and others fell from the trees or rose from the leaf litter around us, until there was a sea of reflective white eyes, shining in the evening dim. Ben shrieked, and we ran, using our torches like shields. We spun the beams of light towards the horrors as they scrambled around us, like a pack of wild beasts. Out from the shrubbery beside me, the greenish gummed jaws of a Poglin burst out, ripping leaf and branch as it torpedoed towards us. Our light, though, warded the thing off, causing it to recoil with strange animal-like squeals as it entered the glow. Frantically, we climbed up through the wall of wood, whilst the leaf litter rustled closer and closer to us. Adrenaline surged through my body, and I ran and ran, not looking back, never daring to, out of fear that they would be right behind me. Out of the Dean's green hell I galloped, bounding over the road, with no concern for the incoming cars as they swerved to avoid hitting me. Still I sprinted, my terror supercharging my feet, to the point where I could have given the Flash a run for his money. Upon reaching my house, I charged the door, grabbing at the handle, only to discover it was locked. And even as I scrambled and frantically jammed my key into the door, I had not yet realised that something was amiss. Slamming it shut behind me, I locked the door, and only then, when I could take a breath in, did I notice that Ben was not with me. He must have fell or gotten taken. I had to go get him. Those were the thoughts that ran through my mind. But as I was about to open the door, he appeared behind the glass, his bloodied fists banging frantically on the panes. "Come on, let me in," he yelled. But there was something in his voice that didn't sound right. The tones were sort of off, and his words were eager rather than fearful. "How do I know it's you?" I questioned.
Come on, it's me. You've known me for years. Please don't let me die out here.
Ben whimpered, but again, the delivery of his pleas came off as mocking and not genuine. I looked through the glass panes and saw his features sagged a little to one side, and his hairline was off. Something was not right.
Ask me anything, I'll answer. Ask me something only Ben would know.
Ben barked with urgency. All right, what did I find in the children's ward back in the Green Acres? I asked him, my heart pounding in anticipation for his response.
A red ball.
Ben swiftly spat the answer, and in doing so, a scared silence fell over our conversation. With my hands trembling and blood cold with dread, I pulled the keys from the door and moved away.
Oh, damn. You didn't tell him, did you?
Ben grinned as his teeth were revealed as a dirty yellow with grey gums and black plaque between each tooth.
You're a...
I stammered, my mind hardly able to process.
You know, the one thing none of those stories talk about is the fact that we don't eat the skin. We wear it. We are what we eat, and there's so many of us out there now, among you.
The false Ben sneered. I backed away, knowing in reality there was no escape from the frightening reality before me.
You were in the hospital?
I whimpered.
I was. I noticed you in Beggar's Alley. I followed you to the hospital and down into the Dean. I was curious, you see. Never has there ever been anyone so eager to find us.
The Poglin spoke, with its voice in a distorted and uncomfortable corruption of Ben's. And Ben? I asked, my heart and mind refusing to accept the obvious, even when deep down I knew.
Flayed, eaten. He screamed your name out as we took his face. We made quick work of him.
False Ben smirked.
I'm going to call the police.
My voice broke, failing to come across as intimidating or true in any way.
Go ahead. Do you know how many prank Poglin calls they get?
Chuckled the imposter.
Why don't you just leave me alone? I won't tell anyone.
I begged, my pleas causing the sagging grin upon Ben's face to widen.
But I know you will. I can tell the squealers. Still, I won't take you now. I'll wait for the right moment. When the lights go out and you're all alone, that's when I'll get you.
He promised, his voice threateningly confident. And so the Poglin wearing Ben's face wiggled a 5-fingered farewell through the glass. Having successfully instilled me with terror, his work was complete.
I'll see you around,
he grinned, before departing from my door and vanishing into the night. I didn't see Ben after that, and I hope to never see him again. His parents seemed to disappear along with him. A moonlight flit. That's what the rumour was. To escape unpaid bills or mounting debt. But I knew the truth. It was the Poglins. The Poglin kids took them. That's what I told everyone. I shouted it from the rooftops, told my parents, begged my sister to believe me, but none of them listened. I even went to the police with the same story, but the officers just laughed. One of them, a more caring figure, placed a hand upon my shoulder and assured me, The Poglins are just an urban legend. He grinned through his yellow teeth.